for starters, could you please introduce yourself for us?
My name is Dr. Myrle Ballard, and I'm Assistant Professor, Indigenous Scholar in the Department of Chemistry, Faculty of Science, University of Manitoba. And I'm Anishinaabe from the Martin First Nation.
March 22nd is the World Water Day. So I wonder, how does your research involve water?
My research is very important to myself and my Anishinaabe, because water is supposed to be our friend. Water is life. But the way water has been turned against my community of Lake St. Martin, of the communities surrounding the neighboring communities, water has been turned against us. So that's why I'm really interested in water, because our lake, the lake proper, Lake St. Martin, has been mismanaged for about 50, 60 years with the artificial water control to appease the recreational users upstream. And it's always the downstream inhabitants, which are the First Nations, that always suffer. We used to have livelihoods in my community. Every household used to have cattle and farm animals. We were a sustainable community at one time, and because of constant flooding, that has changed. So what I'm doing in my research is using a model, a framework that I call the three-eyed seeing, and it's based on the two-eyed seeing, but it goes one step further to accommodate the third eye, which are what is our relations, because the elders say that we have to speak for those that can't speak for themselves, which are the third eye, which are the species, everything else that cannot speak for themselves, water, trees, and in this case, it's water, because water has life. If water becomes stagnant, it dies. And if water is manipulated, everything, it changes its composition, everything. Using Anishinaabe, because within our language, we have a management system that is embedded within our words, and they identify what the natural law is of the ecosystem, what the natural law is of the aquatics. So that's what my research is based on. Based on these words, we can identify what the natural law is of the specific area of the river, the specific area of the lake, the specific species. So the natural law is why the Indigenous people, Anishinaabe, named a specific spot within the waters. And these are based on the natural law, which is the natural function in the ecosystem, their role in the ecosystem. For example, we have community names, and those are very important, and they're based on what their original roles in the ecosystems were.
Thank you for talking about your research, the importance of it. If there are any other aspects to it that don't include water, I would love to know about them as well. The
elders around my community, around the area, the research area, there's been a lot of changes to the ecosystem, what's happening on the ground level as well. When we take drone images, we can see that the elders identify patches that are dry. They're different color, and these are trees that are drying up, and they're really visible. That's because the elders say that because of the constant fluctuation of the water levels, it affects the ground table as well, the water table. What's happening is these trees are being flooded from underneath. They're wet and they're drowning, so they start to rot from underneath. What happens underneath, you can see from the air, and that's really important. And as well too, the video, the drone images of what's happening on the ground since the flood and afterwards, before do I have images from before. These are important to document and keep as well, to show the progression of what happened before, the elders' knowledge, the oral history, the oral tradition of the land, of what the people know versus what's been happening throughout the years now. And now that they're gonna, the province is proposing another outlet channel. They built the first one in 2011, and there's been a lot of changes because of that. It's important that to document what's going on before some more changes, before man makes more changes to the natural aquatic ecosystem.
Those are very important points. Thank you so much for bringing them up. I wonder, as one of our Indigenous scholars, why did you choose the Faculty of Science to do your research?
Because I think it's important to introduce Indigenous science into Western science, for lack of a better word. Indigenous knowledge holders know about the land, and it's so important to document this knowledge and to bring it right along with Western science, because it is a science within what the people know. It's always the people at the ground level, the Indigenous knowledge holders who know about the changes first that are happening, and it's only Western science is always they respond later, but it's the knowledge holders at the ground level that are basically the first responders. They know what's happening first at the ground level of changes within the ecosystem. And then it's only after there's a time lapse there where Western scientists know what's happening, but it's important that's why this the three-eyed seeing is really important, because it includes the ground responders, or the first responders in it, and they'll be the ones that identify, that will be the voice for those that can speak for themselves.
So with the importance of your research, I now wonder what might be some barriers to your research, and how do you think those can be improved?
The barriers to the research is these have been ongoing, is the hesitancy of Western scientists, the natural scientists, to accept Indigenous science as a science within its own right. And that has been an ongoing issue, but that's one of the things that being an Indigenous person and speaking my language and the experiential aspect, I know that Indigenous science is a science, and that's where that I'm going to lead the way to prove it.
That is wonderful. Yeah. I think you've talked about it a bit, but I wonder if you can go in depth, and how do you seek to make an impact through your research? There's different means of impact. I know that the Western science is really about publication, but there's different means of getting the impact of being impactful. There's websites now. People are turning to websites, videos. I have videos as well of people. Plus, I have stories from people. They're on my website, and there's a few projects that I will be doing. For example, I just received research funding that's over $2 million from CIHR, and I just received it, and as an early career researcher. So I have this funding, and I have a good team that will work with me, and I'm really excited. I have there's so many opportunities here, and I'm so excited to start the research. I'm really excited to see what happens in the future with your research, and congrats on the funding. You're doing important work, so I'm really glad that it's becoming noticed. What is your advice for fellow researchers, or maybe grad students who are interested in your research? My advice for fellow researchers, the early career, is being an Indigenous person, I guess, is my driving
my driving motivator, if you want to call it that. But because it seems like I always have to prove to the naysayers, like I think that's my driving force. Like I have that drive and I can prove it, that I can go above and beyond. And for Indigenous scholars of the early career, you can do it. You just have to, what I do because I talk from the experiential side. And when I start developing the research, I try and write it from other people's perspective. And that's so important, what I've heard, and I try and put those into words. Yeah, that into words. Yeah.
That is amazing advice. Thank you so much. For my last question, I wonder, what do you hope for future?
For the future, I hope there's more Indigenous scholars that are rising up, because right now, being an Indigenous scholar, we are so thinly stretched, and there needs to be more for people, especially in the sciences, that there needs to be more. And I think there's a different programs that are out there that are working with Indigenous students to bring them into the Faculty of Science. And I think this is a really good start, and to start developing Indigenous students to get into the sciences. I think that's a very good start, and because we need Indigenous graduates working with Indigenous communities, Indigenous needs, Indigenous needs, because they're the ones that really understand what's going on at the ground level, and they really understand the needs of the community. For example, myself, I really understand what was happening regarding the water and its impact on the land, its impact on everything, livelihoods of the people, the health of the people. And I think that's really important to draw that connection.
Absolutely. I hope for that future too. Thank you so much for doing this with us today. I'm pretty sure every grad student, fellow researcher will highly appreciate this.
And I need graduate students. They don't have to be in chemistry, because my research is unique. So if anybody is looking for an advisor, they can contact me.
This is perfect. I'm sure they will be all very lucky to have you as their advisor.